Good afternoon and most welcome to 1506. I will continue with Hans Rein's article that I went through to some extent in 1505, Faith, Grace and Destruction of Tradition. And I will make a leap in the text to page 25, second paragraph. And we are now into Nietzsche and his Antichrist and his most virulent attack on Christianity. The general figure behind the nihilistic evaluation, according to Nietzsche, is the theologian who comes in many shapes, also as idealistic philosopher. I have found traces of it everywhere, he writes. Whoever has theologian blood in his veins has a wrong and dishonest attitude toward all things. And the pathos that develops out of this is what is known as faith. It is on this type of spirituality that he declares his war. And the ultimate representative of this comportment is Paul. In Nietzsche's account, it is Paul that brings the Epicurean and Stoic enlightenment of the late antiquity to an end. What he divided, Nietzsche writes, was that with the aid of the little sectarian movement on the edge of Judaism, one could ignite a world conflagration. That with a symbol God on the cross, one could sum up everything downtrodden, everything in secret revolt, the entire heritage of anarchist agitation in the empire into a tremendous power. Paul thus comes forth as a cunning thinker and politician. who, with the help of a perverted set of values, infiltrates the Roman Empire. Paul is the instrument of a kind of self-corruption of the ancient world, whereby nihilistic and reactive instincts come into power. In the Antichrist, this development and emergence of life-denying values comes forth as a kind of tragic fatality, with very loose connections to the complex historical reality of the gradual Christianization of the empire. In the Antichrist, this development and emergence of life-denying values comes forth as a kind of tragic fatality, with very loose connections to the complex historical reality of the gradual Christianization of the empire. Therein, I'd say, there is trope in the graduality of Christianization. Christianity, in Nietzsche's account, is simply the destruction of Rome and Athens by Jerusalem. Contrived by Paul as the most foremost representative of priestly slave morality. In the genealogy, however, he is more attentive to how the adoption of ascetic values in a specific situation, characterized by suffering and subjection, can also constitute a kind of heightening of life's power over itself. And how the ascetic priest, in this sense, is the one who provides a kind of minimal control over life as the ruler over suffering. Ascetic values and their doctrines of sin, punishment, chastity, grace, redemption, and eternal life are thus not only looked upon here and analyzed as a kind of necessary and useful evil, deployed by the priestly caste to maintain their control over a suffering population. Instead, Nietzsche here also recognizes the close, intimate, even inextricable bond between philosophy and a certain asceticism of the spirit. Indeed, he writes here, it was only in the leading strings of this ideal that philosophy learned to take its first small steps on earth. This also explains why philosophers tend to have such difficulties in assessing the ascetic ideal in a non-prejudiced manner. Ascetic ideas are in the end different ways not simply of degrading and destroying life, but of maintaining it. And Christianity, as he writes there, is the great treasure house of ingenious means of consolation. So do note that Christianity is a mean of consolation. Asceticism is a part of that, no matter how much displeasure it brings. Often the philosophers and scientists like to think of themselves as the opponents of ascetic religious values, but in their most critical posture they also betray their deeper commitment to these ideals. Precisely in their conscientious intellectuality, and very important here, in their remaining belief in truth. Truth in italics is an important Nietzschean term. Thus Nietzsche can write, that which constrains these men, however, this unconditional will to truth, is faith in the ascetic ideal itself, even if as an unconscious imperative. Do not be deceived about that. It is the faith in a metaphysical value. the absolute value of truth, sanctioned and guaranteed by this idea alone. Nietzsche's pointing out of the metaphysical truth is similar to what we discussed earlier as das Man, or truth in the sense of Edward de Bono. Truth by itself without context and before everything else. With this argument in place, the whole problematic of asceticism and ascetic ideals, to which the last part of the genealogy is devoted, is placed on a new plane. Now we see that the history of religious and philosophical and scientific spirit is a shared history to which the philosophical genealogist does not simply have a free and objective access. But in which he is also implied and implicated in a circular hermeneutic situation, where the limits between the religious and secular and the rational and mythical becomes more uncertain. It is also at this point that we can fully grasp the urgency and necessity of understanding the complex genealogy of human spirituality delineated in the genealogy. As well as the profound difficulties involved in this task. in order to understand critically the role and fate of Christianity as a spiritual condition, it does not suffice simply to adopt a critical enlightenment position that can reject its superstitious beliefs, but also and ultimately to unearth the common bond between the religious and the philosophical as a genealogical critical history of life as self-shaping, self-controlling, and truth-making. I'm going to put a pause there. What does Nietzsche mean by metaphysical truth? Or as truth as a belief or adherence, you could say. In their remaining belief in truth, when he speaks about philosophers and religious alike. Truth is, especially in gay science, is another object that Nietzsche looks carefully into. And here is pointing to that truth take the first seat or the second seat in a twin carriage of truth and faith. He is then very different from analytical philosophers, for instance, which I'm going to use as an example here to clarify the point. Ingmar Hedenius, for instance, made a really big point. His old massive seminal work, Faith and Truth, or Faith and Knowledge or Understanding. The Swedish term is vetande, it doesn't really translate easily to English. A stronger tendency of truth as knowledge. They are not at all equal there. Ingmar Hedenius as a proponent of a new wave analytical philosophy or logical positivist of the modern age, common philosophy, if you like, shared by everyone. Nietzsche means that the modern day belief in truth has replaced something much more fundamental with a superficiality. Truth as a proposition that makes a true result, sum, if you like. That we are ruled by either truths or beliefs. And he sees them almost like two monsters, like Abyss and Scylla. What does he mean, his term truth? Edward de Bono, as we've gone through earlier, I will use because he exposes truth in the Western tradition. It's a transcendental truth that makes itself true and it takes upper hand over goals, intentions, and of course the Seinsfrage. One could say, try this as a way to understanding that Ingmar Hedenius, as I put as an example, I don't have a beef with him or anything like that, but Ingmar Hedenius uses truth, established that as foundational, as prioritized, as the better half, and thereby suppressing belief. That goes down. Jacques Derrida would say this is a codependency. So if this is truth, it is dependent on a supplement, if you like, of belief. And thereby, they are not dissimilar at all. It's a sort of logocentric establishment of a now. And belief is either parasitic or actually calling the shots. Nietzsche says they are not alike. They're actually the same thing. It's a product of a Western tradition where faith had become a thing, and therefore we sort of tell ourselves what is truth. As we mentioned, enlightenment, and it's a good word here. The creation of truth, not belief. And hard to say that is not very typical of the Enlightenment. A very problematic move, as we know from this series. Speaking about earlier about law, the excluded middle, all these efforts to create something that we think is completely stable based on something that we discard or even use as a scapegoat. Nietzsche did not fall for that trick. Modern day belief in truth is very similar to belief. And it will cause an intellectual asceticism. Heidegger would say this is definitely Denken, the contradictory, superficial thinking that is dense, tough. In Gay Science, Nietzsche finishes off the truths of science, just as he attacked religion in Antichrist and Zarathustra. I would say our take on this, using Merleau-Ponty and Stephen M. Rosen, is that there is a chirality between truth and belief. But they don't truly take the opposing sides. And my proposal, this is taking place in Cartesian space, one plane, and therefore they nullify each other's. This nullification tendency that was pointed out by Jacques Derrida, Georges Bataille, Deleuze, Guattari, and others, which is postmodernism. There are no truths because they are based on beliefs, could be the take of this, and that it is sort of a circle. You return to the same point, going nowhere because all points are relative to each other. No, they are not. There is an inherent subjective directionality, not seen by Nietzsche, seen later by Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty and Wittgenstein, I would say. It is also the discovery of quantum mechanics that there is, or there are, whether you make a plural of chirality, there are foundations, but they are subjective, stemming from the subject point. Something that Nietzsche would never have believed, but I would say he would have accepted it. Maybe a question from Kalle here. I'll help you with this. And let me also adjust the camera before you start. Here you got a pen.
I think this is useful, this dichotomy, Apollonian, Dionysian. Let's make a comparison since we are speaking about religion, Christendom. To simplify, we could say Apollonian stands for reason in Nietzsche's work, and Dionysian stands for feelings, passion. And this made me think about the church. Let's say Church of Sweden, or let's say the Anglican Church. Make a comparison. I'm going to think about Apollonian. So, because here you have a lot of reason, so to say. Here the reason dominates, while Dionysian is more like the Pentecostal movement. Here you have passion, let's say feelings. And I would like to return to the previous paper by Hans Ruyn that we went through, entitled The Passivity of Reason. I recommend that. So go back to Hans, one of the previous lectures by Hans, Passivity of Reason by Hans Ruyn. And when he went through this dichotomy and this thinking, reason and feelings. Was it feelings, passivity, feelings more or less? It's the so in Western thinking, usually the reason has the dominance. That is the good thing, while feelings are something bad. That is something passive. Feelings are something passive. And here you can see roughly here in Dionysian. Okay, I'm simplifying a little bit because here you are not really thinking, you are passive completely. In this, you only receive, you are saved once for all. And there are a lot of emotional outbursts at Pentecostal movements. I don't say it's a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. But I think the best good thing would be have something synthesis. And here, so here you have the reason. It's more cold, aloof in this Anglican church. Everything is following a pattern, so to say, the liturgical service. And where do we put faith? But faith becomes something. Would we say it's something passive? Luther is something passive because you believe and then you receive everything. So you could say that perhaps Luther, it's difficult to say where do you put the faith, because reason in Luther doesn't play any role at all, because you're only supposed to believe. Although, of course, Luther plays a great role, of course, in the Anglican Church and the Swedish Church, but still, reason is something. Okay, you have reason there, but still, everything is. How would you? I don't know how to put it. I don't know. Perhaps you have a solution to this thing. So you have the Apollonian movement in the, I would say, in the Anglican Church. Everything, the reason plays a role there, and passion and a feeling is delegated, so to say, more to the, let's say, to the Pentecostal movement. And so the Luther's is, I would say, it's, you have it like works. So works you have emphasis in the Catholic Church, but Swedish Church is relatively close to the Catholic view in this. So you need, you speak about the Protestant work ethic. Of course, that means that you have to work, but the faith reason is still delegated. It's like, yes, it's more like feet. You work or your hands. So you could say that there is really no brain is, so to say, disappears here. You have instead, say, hands, feet, because you work. You have the Protestant work ethic. While let's say Catholic, you have there the brain, so to say. I don't know. I'm simplifying. I try to get grips with this dichotomy, Apollonian and Dionysian. But I give it back to you. I think I left this off topic a little bit, perhaps.
Why, thank you very much, Kalle. Maybe, I think these are complementary, and defining truth as dependent on belief, suppressing it will make truth weaker. But see it as two spiral movements enforcing each other. And as in this example of the emotional and the rational, which Damasio, for instance, had taken up, that we claim that intellect is completely, like some drinks are sugar-free, so reason is completely emotional-free. And he proved that is not the case. We cannot do deep thinking, we cannot be successful chess players or physicists. This sort of weakens both sides in a complementary directionality, because what Edward de Bono was asking for was a direction. And it's odd, I remember now firstly, what he said, the most important question was why? Oddly similar to Heidegger. So I'm pretty certain Edward de Bono never read Heidegger. It wouldn't be up his alley. But bringing them together brings in the why. And bringing the why into the question gives meaning, and also, oddly enough, brings them together to make them brothers, not fiendish enemies. This Dharmasha, people have been taking it even further, suggested by Jan Eiskens, for instance, that they are the same in some ways. Attacking one or trying to extrapolate only reason is a bit like trying to take my bones out of my body. So you can have two separations. The bony Hans and the muscular Hans, saying that they have nothing similar in common. That would weaken both. I like this Dionysian and Apollonian. Reason and passion can come together, and they are together already in the brain. In our system, which is not only the brain, most definitely hands and feet. And as we know today, the intellect sits mainly in the chest. Here, we do the bodily abstractions, as shown by Lakoff Johnson and others. Our embodiment is intellectuality. And therein we also find a higher level of, I'll not use the word truth, but path to the higher, to the spiritual realm, let's say also. So feared by Nietzsche. For good reasons, he didn't have this complementary understanding. So thank you very much, and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.
Jo.